Hello guys, welcome to our talk show. Today we are very pleased to have invited a very famous ESL English learning material author, Lewis Lansford, to be on our show. Hi, Lewis.
Hello.
Welcome to our talk show.
Great
Welcome to China.
See you. Yeah, thank you very much. I'm so pleased to be in China.
You know, most of our audience, they are English learners,
Right.
young people. Can you enlighten them with some of your materials?
I can. So, the title of my talk this morning was Accent, Culture, Communication. What are the targets for global learners? So, I started off talking about real English.
What is real English in your opinion?
Exactly. Well, my whole career, learners have come to me and said, I want to learn real English.
Yeah.
And so I think, yeah, that's reasonable.
Is American English real English?
Right.
British English real English?
Exactly the question. So is it American English, is it British English, or is it something else?
Yes. What's your opinion?
Well, 36% of the world's population speak English. So more than a third, a little more than a third of the people in the world speak English. Now, how many of those people, what percentage of the English speakers do you think have English as their first language? Can you guess?
Less than 50%?
A lot less. In fact, it's about 16%.
Only 16%?
Of the people who speak English have English as their first language. So this is people from the US, the UK, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, some people in the Philippines, people in Malta, South Africa. Some people in India have English as their first language, but that's only 16% of the people who speak English have first language English. That means that 84% of the English speakers in the world are people like you, second or third or fourth language speakers.
Yes.
So, if we're asking what's real English, we have to say that it's your English and
Chinese
my
English?
Yeah, Chinese English. In fact, the biggest, we've got, you mentioned American English, British English.
Yeah.
Do you know what the biggest type of, the biggest variety, we call it a variety of English. American is a variety, British is a variety. Do you know what the biggest variety of English in the world is?
Because China has the most population?
It's
I think it's Chinese English, right?
Exactly.
Oh, okay.
So the biggest English in the world is Chinese English.
Oh.
So that's also real English.
Okay, you qualify that as real English. We're glad to hear that. No one ever told us about it.
Right, okay. Well, it's true. I read it.
Because I think I used to be an English teacher. Many in Chinese English teachers and also Chinese English learners will take Chinese English as like wrong English because it carries certain, especially certain accent, and because the Chinese in the language we think in different way. If we translate our Chinese characters into English literally, some sentences they form are not naturally English. It's hard to understand.
Right. Okay, well let's talk about accent. I think it's a really interesting topic.
Yes, I would love to hear that.
When people study languages, there's sometimes, and when people teach languages, there's sometimes this idea that you'll be a beginner and it's like a cup and it slowly fills up with language. And then when you get to the top, when the cup is full, you'll speak like a native. And anytime that the cup is not quite full, then you're kind of like a failed native. You haven't quite arrived at really speaking the language. The problem with that is that it's really rare for people to study a second language and achieve a native-like accent. It just very rarely happens in the world.
Yeah, is it necessary that we have to achieve that native accent?
Exactly, because what that means is we've set this target, or we feel that there's this target of speaking like a native that most people never reach. And that means that in some ways, we've created a world where most people who are learning a second language are a failure.
Oh, that's not a good
It's
term.
not a good feeling,
No one
is
wants
it?
to be admitted as a failure.
Right, and so it's. I have to ask: have we got the right target? Is speaking like a native really a reasonable target?
Yeah.
Really, I think what we're coming to understand now, people who do research in linguistics and in global communication, is that what's important for your English is that you're intelligible. People need to understand you. And if I can understand you, then does it matter if you have an American or a British or a Canadian accent or an Australian accent? Now, if somebody has a really good ear and really wants to have a British accent, or if you want to have a British flavor to your English, I say, that's great, do that. If you can do it, do it. Some people can.
Yeah.
But if you can't do it,
it's not big
maybe
of a
not
deal.
that important. Yeah, if people can understand you, if you can communicate, then your accent is not so important. But let me go one step further.
Okay.
Your accent in English says something about who you are and where you're from.
It carries my own culture.
Exactly. So when you speak English or when you speak any second language, you don't forget your native language, you don't forget where you come from. It just becomes something that's yours. It's a tool that you've taken, and it's something that you can use in the way that you see appropriate.
Very good. I think after hearing this, we can kind of tell the audience, so if you speak English with an accent, it's not something you should be ashamed of. It can be something you are proud of.
Exactly.
Actually,
it can
right?
be, so often we hear someone speaking English, a first language user of English like myself will hear someone from another country speaking with an accent and say, your accent is beautiful. The way you speak English, it sounds so nice, it sounds so much better than me, even though it's my language. The other thing, my opinion about accent may be informed by my life. I grew up in the US, and then I moved to long story, but I taught in Spain for a little while, and then when I finished university, and a friend of mine was in Spain, and he said, "Oh, come to Spain, you can teach English." And I thought, oh, that's a good idea. So I went to Spain, and I started to teach English, and then I thought, I don't really know what I'm doing. My undergraduate degree was in English literature, and you don't necessarily know how to be a good English teacher just because you've read Shakespeare. So I went back to the US and I got a master's degree in teaching English because I thought, yeah, this is a good way to see the world, and then I can put a sign on my door that says Lewis Lansford, English teacher.
English expert.
Or just, so it's like a job. Where having a degree in literature might mean you've developed your mind, but it doesn't necessarily lead to a job.
Yeah.
So then I taught at the university level in Arizona for a while, and then I got a manufacturing job in a manufacturing company in Japan, teaching English to engineers and business people.
Oh, so you also went to Japan?
Yeah.
Spain, Japan, US.
Right. Well, yeah. So from Japan, then I went to work for a publisher in Hong Kong.
Okay.
And
China?
was developing. That's where I started working in publishing as an editor, developing books and other materials. For at that time for the Asian market, for Japan, Korea, China, Taiwan, some for Thailand. Anyway, around that region.
Yeah. So most of them are speaking English as the second language.
Exactly.
Yeah. They don't usually sound like American or British.
Right. Yeah.
If you're only used to listening to or talking to English-speaking or American English-speaking people, you may find it difficult to communicate with them.
Right, exactly. And so anyway, I met in Japan, I met an English girl, and we got married, and then I ended up going to live in the UK after Hong Kong.
Wow.
So every day, I've lived in the UK for 20 years.
So you are very experienced in the accent.
Well, exactly, and that's what I'm getting to, is that every day I live in the UK, and when I open my mouth, people know that I'm not British. And some people say, "Oh, you haven't lost your American accent," and I think, well, yeah, I was a grown man when I moved to the UK, and you don't normally change your accent.
Yeah.
And people can understand me, and my accent is part of my identity.
Yeah, actually you carry international accent.
Yeah, something like that, yeah. And so, even in your first language, you have an accent that says something about who you are and where you're from.
Yes.
So why not in a second language? Now, if you were speaking to me in Chinese English and I didn't understand what you were saying because of your accent,
that's a problem.
then I would say that's a problem.
Ah.
But I can understand you perfectly.
Oh, thank you.
And yeah, you speak very well. You don't speak like an American, you don't speak like an Australian, you don't speak like an Irishman, you speak like a Chinese person.
Yeah.
And that's your accent.
That carries
and
my
that's
own
where you're
culture.
from. Exactly.
Oh, thank you, thank you.
So
Not
it's
many
a-
people have said that to me.
Well,
but
see-
thank you for the compliment.
And it's a feature of who you are. It's not a flaw. It's not something you need to change. It's not something you need to fix. It doesn't show that you haven't perfected your English because your English is beautiful.
Thank you. Well, I really like that quote you just mentioned. Accent is a feature, not a flaw. Wow, I love it. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm
Yeah,
drinking
keep-
coffee.
keep that in
Need
mind.
to keep the energy level up. Okay,
Thank
so
you.
that's accent. Are we
Yes.
happy? Have we?
Yeah.
Discussed
Because
accent?
in China there are many schools and also there are some online courses. I have found out many, maybe it's a wrong way. Many schools teachers they put so much focus on the pronunciation, on the accent. There even some course says like 10 days or a week taking a very extensive courses you're able to achieve American or British accent. Many people would take the course, but because of not many people in the end they can really achieve that.
Right.
They will become frustrated in language learning.
Yeah.
That's not good.
Right, and I if someone is interested in that, I don't want to discourage them, but I would also say let's maybe be more positive about accent. Maybe there's a good expression in English: if it isn't broken, don't fix it.
Yeah,
If there's not a problem, you don't need to solve it.
exactly.
So instead of saying my accent is a problem, you can just switch that off and say, I have an accent, it's not a problem.
So what?
And then you
right?
save the money that you would have spent going to improve your accent.
Exactly. Go to spend the money on something else, right?
Exactly,
To help
right.
you improve your
Yeah.
maybe fluency. Good.
Now,
Good. Yeah.
we could follow on with this question of accent by thinking about culture.
Yeah.
If you're planning to go and say live in the US or live in the UK, then maybe it is more important to think about US culture or UK culture, to think about how language, and we could say even accent, is connected with culture.
Yeah.
But these days, most people, here's some more statistics for you.
Okay.
About 74% of all communication that takes place in English in the world is between second language users of English. So it's like a Chinese guy speaking to a German guy in English, or a Polish tourist in Japan speaking to a shopkeeper in Japan in English. So no native speaker
Involved.
in the interaction, not involved. And we also have situations where we would have, inside China or outside of China, maybe German engineers working on a project in China with Chinese engineers, and there might also be...
I had experience being an interpreter for this kind of event before. Yeah,
great. And so if you've got a German guy and a Chinese guy, and so let's throw in a Russian person in there as well, in China speaking English, how important is American culture or British culture? It's not, there's
irrelevant.
no connection. Exactly. When it comes to questions of in that group, how does a person of a lower rank in the company address a person as a higher rank in the company? That's not really, that's about culture rather than about language.
Yeah, I see.
We would find maybe even a difference between the US and the UK. The US might be a less formal culture,
Yeah.
and so people would use first names more.
Yeah.
The UK might be a more formal culture where people would use last names more. But then if we're talking about Russia, China, and Germany, those three also might have different ways of using
expressing-
names and addressing each other.
Exactly.
So that culture that those three engineers are working in is a culture that arises in the moment.
Yeah.
And they have to negotiate these cultural matters of politeness, or even things like table manners. When you sit down, how do you use your knife and fork or your chopsticks, or
drink soup first or
exactly, or do you
afterwards?
use a spoon for the soup, or do you drink the soup? In Japan, you drink the soup like a cup.
Okay.
And so all of these things, that's not about language, it's about culture.
Culture, yeah.
And okay, if you've got these three guys in China, then probably you want to do it Chinese style.
Yeah, yeah.
But then say your Chinese engineer and your German engineer and your Russian engineer go to an oil project in Saudi Arabia, but they're working in an international environment, then it gets really interesting. Because there's no home culture. And this is increasingly common in the world.
Yes, yes. So that's something we really shall be aware of. You want to really communicate in English. You have to know more about the cultures of different language or different countries.
Right, or you just have to understand that you don't know about the cultures of different countries, and so the people need a kind of sympathy. People need to understand that if somebody walks up to me and says, "Hey, Lansford," maybe in his culture that's okay and normal. In my culture, it seems a bit direct.
Oh yeah.
And so I have to say, okay, well,
adjust yourself.
Right, I can adjust myself, and I can say, "Oh, call me Lewis," or something like this. But we just need to pay attention to these cultural things, and rather than becoming offended or confused, I might say, "Is that how you do it in your country? You just call people Lansford?" Or something like that. So you need some negotiation to know how to communicate together.
I see. So in the end, language learning purpose is to communicate, right? Yeah, the communication is the goal in the end.
Exactly.
And communicate not just messages, but culture, etiquette, and
Right.
All these things behind.
Yeah, and understanding that the English that you use can be completely free of culture sometimes, or it can include a lot of cultures. It can, Chinese English in some ways will include Chinese culture. American English may include some American culture, but all of those cultures belong together. And I want to say again that if you go to the U.S. and speak English there, of course, U.S. culture is very important in that situation. If you go to the U.K., you go to Canada, then the language that you use, the English that you use there, is full of the local culture.
Yeah.
But if you're using English outside of those places with other people who aren't American and aren't British and aren't native speakers, then culture is a lot more difficult to define.
I see. So you have to define the problem. The problem is not your accent. Maybe sometimes if you have some problems, it's not related to your accent, but related to your lack of knowledge in culture.
Right.
Yeah. And also, I want maybe I could add one thing here is because I personally stayed in the UK for 1 year, in London for 1 year.
All right.
Even when I was in London, every day during my communication, I didn't talk to the locals all the time.
Right.
There are many international people there.
Right.
People from India, from Pakistan. Yeah, those many people they're working there. If you're only used to a British English, you find it hard to communicate.
Yeah.
Many cab drivers, shop owners, they speak differently.
Exactly. When I go to London, sometimes I work in an area near Oxford Street, which is one of the main shopping streets.
Yeah.
And I walk down the road, and I keep my ear open. Russian, Spanish, Portuguese, any language, and you hear some English as well, but you hear it's a complete melting pot.
Yeah.
But then these people are also all speaking together, and the Russian guy doesn't generally speak German with the German guy. They speak English. The Russian and the German speak English together. The Chinese guy and the guy from Pakistan speak English together.
Very good, very good. Yeah, very good point. Yeah, keep that in mind. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, the culture is really the core important thing behind speaking the language.
And I have a story about when I first arrived in the UK. I maybe had been living there for 1 year, and I had a car, and I needed a mechanic. Let's say new tires, a mechanic, something like that. So I asked a friend, "Can you recommend a mechanic?" And he said, "Yeah, I can, and here's the name." And he told me more or less where the mechanic's garage was located. And I looked at the map, and I thought, okay, it's either here or it's here, and I'm not sure, so I'll just phone up and ask where it is. So I phoned up the mechanic, and I thought I knew where it was. The map said B1357. That was the number of the road, the highway, the motorway. And I said, "Are you on the B1357? And the guy said, "I don't know the number of the road. We're on the Sunderland Road." And I looked at the map, and nothing said Sunderland Road. And so I said, okay, I'll try something different. There was a roundabout on the map. There were 2 roundabouts, which are round roads with lots of roads going off them. So I said, are you to the east of a big roundabout? And he said, I don't know if east, west, we're near the oak tree roundabout.
Wow.
And I looked, and there were 2 roundabouts, but nothing said the oak tree roundabout, and I was out of ideas.
Well, it's kind of like even though you're speaking the same language, but it feels like you're speaking 2 different languages.
And guess what happened? I said, okay, thank you. I put down the phone, and I didn't know where the place was. So recently, I've read some research into this exact phenomenon. I grew up in North America, and in North America, the roads, especially in the West, they generally run north and south, and east and west, and they're straight. And when people ask directions, they say they use north, south, east, and west. And the streets usually have names like First Street, Second Street, Third Street, Fourth
with
Street.
Numbers.
And then across this way, it might be like Oak Lane and Cherry Lane, and all like street names with trees, and it's very logical. So in the States, I would say, oh, are you north of First Avenue? And the person would say, no, we're 2 blocks south of First Avenue. Okay. What the research found is that people in Europe use landmarks. So when he said we're on the Oak Tree roundabout, what he meant was there's a pub on that roundabout, and the name of the pub is the Oak Tree. And when he said Sunderland Road, for hundreds of years, there's been a road from this place that goes to the city of Sunderland. That's not the name of the road. The name of the road is the B1357 or whatever I said.
Only local people
but
can
everyone
know
knows that that's the road to Sunderland, and so that's what people refer to it as. If you say north, south, east, or west, people in Europe don't know the directions usually because the roads go like that. So they say
not straight anymore.
Right. You go to McDonald's, you could say, and then you turn right. So they use landmarks and left and right. So it's a completely different way of thinking about space and about giving directions. So even though English was my first language and English was his first language, we could understand each other's accent. That wasn't a problem. There was a complete cultural failure to communicate, and the 2 of us, we didn't even know what the problem was. You know, he must have thought that was strange. And I put down the phone and I thought that was strange.
Yeah, you would blame on each other.
Right, exactly. I just was confused, and somehow I think I ended up getting in my car and driving around in the area or something like this. I eventually got there, but it wasn't easy.
Yeah. Wow, that really justifies your opinion. Yeah. Thank you for sharing this valuable experience and stories with us. Yeah.
I'm happy that you asked. I'm always happy to talk about this stuff because I think it's interesting, it affects people, and especially this thing about accent. What a nice thing to be able to tell someone, your accent is beautiful, don't worry about it, I can understand you. You should be proud to speak. You're a proud speaker of Chinese English. That's a good thing.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. So for all the English learners, they'll be proud of your accent as long as you're able to communicate.
Exactly.
Communicate well and be aware of the cultural differences. Unless if your accent becomes like a problem to stop you conveying your messages well, then that's a problem. But if that doesn't occur, no problem.
Exactly.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, you've said that perfectly.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for sharing these wonderful ideas with us. And before we finish up here, do you have any other words you may want to say to Chinese learners?
I would just like to say that I have had a very warm welcome in China. I've met so many nice people who are interested in talking about ideas, thinking about language, people with open minds who want to engage and interact and think and talk, and I love that. I love that that this is part of my job. One thing I love about English teaching, about the whole profession, is that it's all about ideas. If you try to have a language lesson with no ideas, it's almost impossible, because why was language invented all those tens of thousands of years ago? Somebody had an idea and he wanted to tell his friend, so he invented a word. He or she invented a word.
Yes.
And then they invented more words so they could share ideas.
Exactly. That's
So-
that's the purpose of learning the language.
Exactly.
Right? To share your ideas. Make sure you have ideas to share.
Precisely. So
Wow.
people who are studying language, people who are teaching language are in a lucky position because they get to fill their head with ideas and learn a language or teach a language.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you
Yeah,
so much
thank
for
you very
everything.
much, yeah.
We wish you all the best. Looking
And
forward.
you,
Looking
yeah.
forward to seeing you more in the future.
Oh, I'm already looking forward to my next visit to China.
Yeah, and also you'll get many people love you, follow you.
Oh, great. Okay.
Because I'm definitely sure you have inspired many of them.
Good. Well, they inspire me too. So it's two ways. So
Thank-
thank you for the inspiration, China.
Okay, see you guys next time.